Boy, oh boy. Today I've really bitten off more than I can chew. What I can say to the question of what freedom means is that it means everything, and that ensuring its presence in our lives and in our world is in our hands. Freedom is no small thing, and really understanding it requires sitting down in front of a huge feast of ideas and philosophies and lived experiences and carefully digesting it all. And we can't do all that this morning. So may the appetizers and crudités I offer this morning whet your appetite for some more exploration. When I began planning for today, this introductory reflection on the theme of freedom, it was my intention to delve into Timothy Snyder's book on tyranny. And Snyder, by the way, is the Levin professor of history at Yale. I expect that many of you are familiar with On Tyranny. It was published in 2017. And that you're also familiar with the reality that fascism is at our doorstep. As Jay said, it is more of a pamphlet than a book, containing 20 very short and very critical lessons that Snyder believes will help us to navigate, understand, and stand against fascism and tyranny. It turns out, though, that his book on freedom is a more fitting resource for today. But as I say, it is much more difficult to digest, especially in one brief setting, such as this morning's. Snyder's perspective is expansive. He uses illustrations from current and historical tyrannical regimes and includes the thoughts of many who, over time, have both responded to fascism and tried to create an alternative path, that is, a path to freedom. People like Václav Havel and Simone Weil and Edith Stein and many, many others. And I don't wish for this talk to simply be a book report, even if I could do this book justice. So if any of you out there are looking for a theme for a master's or a doctoral thesis, well, try defining freedom. I think it is a very worthy project. So what I wish for today is to be able to give you a concise summary of the way in which Snyder defines freedom, but more to talk about how that understanding can help us to know how to live into freedom and make it manifest, taking small bites at a time. The story Jay shared spoke of the difference between deoccupation and liberation. And Snyder equates this to the difference between negative freedom and positive freedom. You know, negative freedom is like deoccupation. It's the removal of harm, the removal of barriers. And of course, this is a necessary condition for freedom, but it is not freedom itself. Snyder claims that this is how we commonly conceive of freedom, as negative, as a lack of barriers or freedom from something. And we can then presume that just removing a barrier is all we need to do to be truly liberated. But positive freedom, on the other hand, involves thinking about who we want to become, knowing what we value, and then thinking about how we want to realize our values in the world. Positive freedom is about being able to hold our values and to have some power to do something with them. Like Maria in the story, positive freedom is being able to make change and to create a livable environment, even maybe in terrible circumstances. Over and over in this book, Snyder says that truly free people roam in a borderland space between what is and what ought to be. That is, in a place where, using our chosen values, we can both imagine and create something different, something unpredictable. So what does this mean for us? Frankly, I think it means activating the many positive freedoms that we still have. These freedoms that we might assume we have, which are freedom from or negative freedom, are rapidly dissipating. And it will take us exercising the positive freedom that we have to change this current trajectory. We have to claim our values and do what we can to step into that borderland space so that we can move the needle from what is to what ought to be. Of course, if there were just one universal version of what ought to be, maybe this project could be easily accomplished. But in truth, if we all agreed, we would be subject to being programmed and incapable of freedom. If we all agreed, we would be incapable of freedom. So unless we understand that what true freedom is, and has been witnessed repeatedly in history as well as in our current reality, we can fall prey to the many forces that conspire to keep us in prisons of the body, the mind, and the spirit. And so Snyder presents this constellation of five forms that true freedom takes. 5 forms that interconnect and overlap and reinforce one another. They're like a constellation in that way. 5 forms that all need to be present for there to be true and positive freedom. And I'm going to share these 5 forms with you briefly. The first is sovereignty. A sovereign person knows themselves and the world sufficiently to make judgments about values and to realize those judgments. Of course, another word for this might be autonomy, though note that Snyder is really quick to remind us that the only way to have sovereignty as an individual is in relationship with others. For it is in this way that we come to know ourselves and to determine the values that we want to hold. And the second form of freedom is unpredictability, which makes sense, right? Things that are predictable can't be totally free. Apparently, Havel concluded that tyranny requires not devotion, but predictability. Tyrants act to impose conformity, forcing us to concede our authentic selves and to become predictably reactive to stimuli which they create. Predictably reactive. We surely see this happening in the US today. And an interesting take on this is that Snyder sees that the world of values is a kind of 5th dimension that interacts with time and space reality. And when we make choices and take action based again on our values, this 5th dimension can seep into our actual world. And they make us and it less predictable. Using our values makes us less reactive, less predictable, and more free. Mobility is the 3rd form of freedom. We all need a right of way that makes us capable of moving in space and time on a path of our choosing that we're free to alter as we go along. Now that right of way includes things like access to food and water and hygiene and healthcare and safety and parks and roads, all of it making it possible for us to make what we can of our lives. And if we are to have these kind of rights of way, then society has to be structured so that these rights are available to everyone. Now, unfortunately, an ideology can also be mobilized to shape things instead toward a certainty of superiority and to propagate uncertainty and fear. And such tactics seek immobility for all of us, to try to keep us stagnant and isolated, which is why mobility is so important to true freedom. Now, I love this one. The 4th form of freedom is factuality. Truth. The more we know the facts, the better equipped we are to use our values to change things. And truth changes everything from truth includes everything from how the universe works, to the reality of climate change, to the perniciousness of racism, to the motivations of the government. Without access to truth, every other form of freedom is put in jeopardy. Without facts, we cannot make decisions for ourselves, and instead may turn to relying on the big lies of the authorities. Finally, the 5th form of freedom is solidarity. Solidarity closes the circle of connection between all these forms of freedom. We cannot produce the things that we need to become free by ourselves. We cannot be free unless our truths can be greeted by others, and in turn, unless we can accept someone else's bodily experience as true, even if we don't share that experience. None of us are free unless all of us are free. Snyder says, freedom cannot be selfish. To declare oneself free is to promise to act such that others can be free. And so there you have the 5 forms: sovereignty, unpredictability, mobility, factuality, and solidarity. All these really solid nouns arranged in this constellation that creates and supports positive freedom. They're solid things that we can imagine, we can create them, we can hold on to them. We're capable of freedom because we can see these things, we can visualize them, and we can work toward their realization. Now, On Freedom concludes with a chapter on government, which sadly is a chapter for some other day. I invite you to go read this chapter if you can. It's really provocative exploration about the relationship between a republic and a democracy and how both are necessary, because we are definitely in need of imagining a new form of government. So now I don't know about you, but to me it feels like I've been talking a long time. And there's still so much more that I could share about On Freedom, but I promise to comment on how Snyder's understanding of freedom might help us to better navigate these times. And curiously, this brings me back to On Tyranny. You know, as I read On Freedom, I kept hearing resonances to the lessons that Snyder had laid out in the earlier work. If you've read it, I think you'll have found that all of his lessons and principles are also those that are already embraced by Unitarian Universalism and humanism alike. So let me try to connect some of the dots. So to engage our sovereignty, one thought is to practice corporeal politics. That means get into your body. Don't allow it to be co-opted by social media or to be neutralized by the powers that be. Go outside, join forces with friends, find your own voice by interacting with the voices of others. That is a way to engage our sovereignty. To practice unpredictability, you could do things that are unusual or even uncomfortable to you. Because if you're willing to break the status quo, you are less able to be controlled by outside forces. Also, ask questions. Don't concede to expectations without investigating them. Engage your curiosity. Now, in order to defend your own mobility and that of others, choose your own path and support others in doing the same. Don't just accept the way things are. Dare to imagine the world that ought to be, and engage the values that you hold dear to claim that possibility, and fight for the rights that make mobility possible. And as for factuality, well, just believe in truth. It's out there. Seek it, search for it, investigate, be willing to learn from others. And then, this is really important, I think, share as many small and local truths as you can find. Believe in the truths that you find and share them. The more that we embrace and name the things we know to be true, the more muscle we build for factuality. And solidarity, well, there are so many ways to practice this. It's as simple as making eye contact with others and making small talk. It's about being kind in our speech. It's about contributing to good causes. It's about seeing the other and defending their worth and their dignity and their right to freedom. Solidarity is so important. We heard it sung today, when a heart joins a heart, when a hand joins a hand. That's when we can be free. Being together in whatever ways possible is critical in these times. Tyrants want to divide us and thereby diminish our power. So friends, we have got to hold hands and stick together. The destruction of democracy and a decline into totalitarianism is not inevitable. Not if we take the work of freedom into our own hands. It's only in these ways that we can truly be free. May it be so.